think you've been reading about our guest today, Michael Lapsley. He's the founder of the Institute for Healing of Memories in South Africa. I think he's best placed to introduce himself, which we'll do in a few minutes. But before that, I'd like Anita to tell us where we are, Building 21, and what Building 21 is, so you get a better sense
Everyone
of...
is 21 years old here, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it, exactly. That's the condition, Michael.
Sure.
So Anita?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Michael, for joining us today. We've tried, but I don't have an elevator pitch Building 21 is. But I suppose the best way to say it is we wanted to capture the romantic notion of the university and the joy of learning about things we don't know. And so it's really a gathering place of minds. Scholars tend to come with their own unknown, and they sort of meld into this space. And so people are working individually on their own passion project within this. We try to help them form a rigorous academic approach in order to understand it. But the beauty is that these problems are usually, there is no tidy methodological approach to say that.
Say that last part again.
There's no tidy methodological approach to say, this is the path to the answer. And so if you just work really hard, you'll get there. It's more like, well, this could be the path, or this could be the path, or this could be the path. And so the beauty of having both open to community, open to staff, open to professors of the university, but I think most importantly is just a place where a student from any faculty, any level, so we have first year undergraduate all the way to postdoctoral, but all together. And really the fact that there's no hierarchy, I think, is because the unknowns are so unknown that there's just no way to exert dominance here, which I think is a really important tool when shaping your intuition. But probably even better is just sharing what we don't know with other people, which I think is a really good way to gain intuition, to forge bonds, to strengthen your own ability to do things that are really hard. So this is Building 21, and when we find people that we think are fascinating, we invite them. And so thank you so much for joining us.
Now you're going to be so disappointed.
I'm super excited. Please don't say that.
So the format is very simple. You'll introduce yourself, tell us a little bit more about healing of memories, and then we'll have questions from or exchange with the students.
We need to know who's in the room first.
Sure, great. Alex, do you want to introduce themselves and what they work on, their project? Yeah.
What they feel they want to tell me today, or tell us today.
Okay, hi, my name is Alex. I'm from
A-L-E-X.
ALEX. I'm from Singapore, and I recently graduated from McGill. I think to be very true to the Building 21 spirit, I graduated from McGill in some ways knowing less than I do coming in, but knowing why I know less.
Wow.
So it's a romantic way to say, you know, I was faced with a lot of questions, and I definitely haven't come to any answers, but then this space has given me the resources and mentorship to look at in the direction that I find the questions meaningful. And the questions that I found meaningful were in terms of the human mind and how we interact with digital technologies in a way that we can understand using non-traditional approaches. So for me, it's phenomenology. I married phenomenology and the digital world, and
You married phenomenology and you've had children?
that's not yet.
You're still working on that part.
Yeah. Just the marriage.
It's a good start.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm Nikia. I am a program assistant here, and I'm working on a project we have running here called the Future of Cities.
Future of cities.
Yeah, so I'm working with another student, Claudia, who also works here, and we basically, along with a group of students from McGill and also community members from all different backgrounds, we're trying to redesign and reconceptualize what a city could be or what it should be, kind of from the ground up. So we're kind of taking different elements of the city and tried to redesign them, and then we met with community members and different organizations to get their opinions and just work on what we think the city of the future should look like.
Does that mean you've done a background like in urban and town planning or what, or geography, human geography, or?
Weirdly enough, I guess I'm doing a PhD right now, partly in geography, where I look at construction sand mining in sub-Saharan Africa. So the links between, I don't know, do you know very much about sand? Or I can go into the little background there. But I guess you need sand for concrete, asphalt, glass, most infrastructure. So I'm looking at kind of, do we have enough sand for infrastructure in sub-Saharan Africa? Sand for infrastructure in sub-Saharan Africa and just that kind of stuff. So somewhat related, but I think this is just really a passion of mine. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
My name is Rebecca. I'm in my undergraduate degree right now at McGill, so I'm in my last semester, and I'm studying cognitive science, and which is kind of like a combination of neuroscience, psychology, philosophy, computer science. It's a little bit of an intersection with a lot of different applications, but what I'm doing at Building 21 right now is exploring wisdom, and exploring it like a little bit more empirically, as in how is it different from intelligence and why do we need wisdom? And that kind of led into a little bit of a project on how we can enhance wisdom, for example, like teaching for wisdom on one side, like in universities, and on the other side, like much more specific, like digital interventions or cognitive enhancements to increase wisdom when you're making like a critical decision for people, like in politics or in military, when you have to make, there's no right answer, but what resources do you use, what people do you go to, and how can we use maybe like AI and technology to enhance our wise reasoning skills?
I looked at my, I got a CV on ChatGPT, and it mentioned that I'd had a doctorate from somewhere. They hadn't offered it to me. So I'm not sure whether the ChatGPT was lying or just, encouraging me to wait or. Yeah. Thank you.
My name is Viola. I'm also a program assistant at Building 21. I did my undergraduate degree in anthropology and biology, which is a really interesting combination of fields. But I realized that I don't like academic writing.
You don't like academic
Writing.
writing?
And so my project when I first came to Building 21 was trying to understand how we can write science using narrative. So how do we get stories to bring across all of the very important, I find fascinating scientific information to people who can't read or don't want to for various reasons, read the very long and often very dry academic articles that are the main way that we get that information currently.
I am Pilani Zamini from Building 21. From South Africa. I'm traveling with Father Michael Lapsley. I'm one of the facilitators with the Institute for Healing of Memory.
My name's Cal. I'm just a fellow here at Building 21. My project is a little tough to summarize, but I'm working on this manuscript. It's in the McGill Library. It's Spanish. It was created in 1643. And the place that created it still exists. And they still operate by, the manuscript just lays out, it's kind of
What date is the manuscript?
1643. So it's this really old document. It's kind of boring. Like the contents of it are it's a beautiful document, but the contents of it are really boring. It just lays out some rules for an organization that was.
Is that because you're a sadomasochist, you're studying it?
Well, it lays out rules, and I'm just interested in like why McGill has it. They now created a digital copy of it and gave it to gave access of it to the place that created it that's still around in Spain. So I'm interested in questions of like what is ownership? What does it mean for an object to belong to an archive or to belong to a place? Questions kind of along those lines.
Me? My name is Erica. I'm an undergraduate student in East Asian Studies and Sociology. Right now, East Asian Studies and Sociology.
East Asian.
East Asian, yeah. I don't have a project yet, but I really like to come to Building 21 to get inspired, and hopefully I get my own project here. Yeah.
Esther?
Hi, my name is Estelle Drouvin. I'm the director of the Center for Restorative Justice here in Montreal, and we are partner of the Institute with Michael, and I'm also facilitator for the Healing of Memories workshop.
Hi, my name is Maiti. I'm a first year in cognitive science and focusing on
Cognitive science. Cognitive science.
and I'm a scholar at B21. For my project, I look at how we can use story to frame our experience. So to either manage discomfort or
How we can use stories to frame our experience.
yes.
So why aren't you part of Healing of Memories? I mean, so go on, you haven't completed. I'm sorry I interrupted.
Well, yes. I'm writing stories that we could use to frame our experience and navigate discomfort and anything with self-education.
Okay.
Your turn.
Are they going to be quiet? They're invisible. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Lucy. I'm a photographer, but I'm also an healing of memory race facilitator. And I'm working with le Centre de Service de Justice Réparatrice de Montréal. And I'm the paparazzi of Michael.
Yeah, I just reminds me of many years ago. I was invited to be a visiting professor at the New School for Social Research in New York. But I was in an earlier visit to New York, and they said, "Okay, we need to interview you." They'd already offered it to me, but they're going to interview me. So then they said, the first question, could you explain in what way you are a public intellectual? Well, I'd never heard of the term. So I said, and then it was just a very short-term, like it was 6 weeks. And I was so worried that the students would realize that I wasn't a real intellectual and wasn't an academic. And then after a couple of weeks, I realized they did realize that, and that's why they were happy, that I wasn't an academic intellectual. They just reminded me of the things that you were saying. I think who invented this room? I mean, who
invented this room, Anita?
Well, so the founder, Olivier Diens, is not here right now. But I would say that it began as an idea of capturing something missing. And then it evolved, capturing something missing. But it evolved with, like, the space exists because of all of the scholars and students that you hear speaking. It exists because of the people that come to it.
Wow. If it hadn't existed, someone would have had to invent it. So wonderful. Anyway, thank you for the opportunity to share a few thoughts with you. I want to speak a bit about what I helped with others to create, because in many ways it was virgin territory in some respects. I'd been part of the liberation struggle in South Africa for many years. And during those struggle years, I was like a priest, pastor, chaplain in the liberation movement. Those years had prepared me for death. This may cost me my life. But it hadn't prepared me for permanent, major physical disability. That had never, either I was going to survive or I was going to be dead. But the in-between options hadn't occurred to me would possibly happen. So I received a letter bomb in April 1990. The date was significant in that it was 3 months after Nelson Mandela had been freed from prison. So it was a sense that the war is over, the talks begin. But in reality, the regime began to talk in the day and continued to kill at night. I'm often fascinated when I'm interviewed by journalists, present company accepted, who say to me, "Now, Father, you received the letter bomb. Did it affect you?" I say, "Well, yes, actually." Surprise, surprise. Obviously, anything which is life-threatening will be life-changing. My memoir is called Redeeming the Past, My Journey from Freedom Fighter to Healer. So when people see that title, they say, "Okay, you're a healer. Well, how many people have you healed?" I say, "Probably none." But I've created spaces where healing happens. I was in Canada a week before I was bombed, and had traveled the country as I had several years previously, and partly it was the question: Nelson Mandela is free. There's going to be talks. What's really happening? And it was the churches who invited me to come here to Canada on that occasion. So I go back to Zimbabwe, where I was living, and let a bomb hidden inside the pages of two religious magazines. I'm not sure how long it had been in my post office box, because I'd been away for a couple of months. So I opened the bomb, hands disappear, eardrums shattered. I knew in that instant the bomb went off that the regime had got me. I had armed police guards 24 hours a day for several years, and they'd been taken away once Mandela was released, because, see, in the war, of course, even if the guards had been there, that wouldn't have stopped a letter bomb. The guards could have been outside, and in the lounge, I'm opening this explosion. But then, for 14 years before the bomb went off, I had lived in the countries of Southern Africa, but traveled the world as part of the struggle against apartheid, particularly seeking to mobilize faith communities, because what was significant about the apartheid state, it claimed to be Christian. It claimed divine guidance. And yet it was a regime based on race and racism as well. So it was the opposite of my understanding of faith, that we're all God's children. We all have equal value, no matter what our background is. So when the bomb happened, there were messages of prayer, love, support from across the world, from Christians, Muslims, Jews, Hindus, Buddhists, communists, atheists. So there was almost like, an avalanche. I often say that when I die, I won't need a funeral, because people said all the nice things then. I don't know why they wait till we're dead before they start saying nice things about us. So yes, I had excellent medical treatment, first in Zimbabwe, then in Australia. But in terms of my emotional, psychological, spiritual journey, I was accompanied by the peoples of the world, on a massive scale. Floods of messages coming in continuously from around the world, and that's what created, if you like, the space for me to, in a sense, spiritually maneuver, and to realize that if I was filled with hatred, bitterness, self-pity, desire for revenge, they would have killed the body. They would have failed to kill the body, but they would have killed the soul, and I would remain their prisoner. Now, I want to say the same thing in sort of several different ways. If terrible things happen to us, there's likely to be one of two journeys, to us or our loved ones. One is victims who become victimizers, who become victims, who become victimizers, that crosses generation. And this is true of individuals, it's true of communities, it's true of nations. So that's the one journey, and the other journey is victim, survivor, victor, in the sense, and often when people don't get beyond being survivors, and it's still, which is still very passive. So being a victor is where we take back agency. If you think of life being like a river, the river flows, something terrible happens, and our life becomes like a whirlpool. We live life in terms of that terrible incident. So when healing begins to start is when the river begins to flow. It's like there's a woman, she came to a workshop. It's a terrible thing to say, but I noticed the ugliness of her face. And she told a story of her son who had been killed 13 years previously. And it's like the day the son was killed, life stopped. And so she comes to the workshop and she tells her story. And I felt moved to say to her, what kind of life do you think your son would have wished for you? And in the process of the workshop, she began to let him go, not to forget him, but to let him go and let him rest, and for her to begin to live her life. On the last day of the workshop, I could have walked straight past her, because here was this radiant woman. The lines in the face had disappeared. And it's like it was the first day of the rest of her life. So she had in that process, she had moved from being the relative of a victim to being victorious in her own, in the sense of her own life, and to move forward. So what I did was to create an experiential workshop for 24 people at a time to explore at the heart level how the past of the nation, their family, their community had affected them. And so in the process of the workshop, the deepest part of it, people tell each other their stories. And I don't know how many of you are in therapy or gone to a therapist, but when we go to the therapist, which can be extremely valuable, but in some ways it's still a one-way street. Because when I finish telling my story to the therapist doesn't say, you think you're messed up? Wait till you hear my story. But in a workshop where you tell your story and your story and your story in a group of 5, 6, or 7 people, pain is transcendent. Pain begins to connect us, and we begin to feel less alone. Also, for 5 years, I was chaplain to a trauma center for victims of violence and torture. And my colleagues were psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers. I was the priest. No one knew what the priest was supposed to do, which was wonderful. I did what I did. I said, that's what priests do. and so, I say we developed this methodology. The very first workshop, it was 2.5 hours. And I was worried we'd given too much time for storytelling. But then within a year, we said, this is this model. There can be 1,000 other models, but this is this model of healing. I think it's important to say, no one has a monopoly on how people heal and what helps us at different stages of our life. But this was this model. Now, what's significant is it was the South African model, where South Africa, as South Africans, we were trying to begin to deal with 300 years. And of course, apartheid since 1948, but the oppression goes back hundreds of years, back certainly to the 17th century as well. So then, 1998, we created this institute. We started doing this work in about 93. So the pregnancy was older than an elephant. It's about 5 years before this is this NGO. But then the very first year, as an organization, we're invited to 2 places: Rwanda, 4 years after the genocide, and New York City. In New York City, many of the participants had been part of the civil rights struggle and the civil rights movement in the US. But they said, it's the first time we had an opportunity to speak about our pain. You know, they knew about analysis and strategy and tactics, but they never dealt with what they were carrying inside them. And also, from those 5 years in the chaplaincy, I came to see that, yes, we were a wounded nation. Yes, we all had stories to tell, but we were not all pathological. We didn't all need clinical intervention. Some of us did, even long term. But the rest of us, we were living our lives, we're having relationships, we were going to work, we were doing all those things. But we still had unfinished business from the past. We still had stuff that we were carrying. And some of it, pain that crossed generations as well, of what had happened to grandparents and great-grandparents, and the stories that had been told, through the years. But then, so the process we started is a process with facilitators, not with clinicians. We're not pretending to be. We're not sort of amateur psychologists or psychiatrists. We are facilitators. So facilitators, the word simply means make easy. I haven't had I haven't given birth to a child, but I believe that when the child is born, often there is a midwife. And the midwife doesn't have the baby. The midwife helps you to have the baby. So facilitators are like that. They're midwives. They help the story to be born. And who said about storytelling? It's yourself, huh? Yes? You mentioned storytelling. Yes. Yeah. And one of the interesting things is that in the small group, I tell my story as a story of defeat, but all the people listening say, "What? And you're still standing? What?" So sometimes other people give us a new pair of spectacles to look at our own story. And again, that can only happen in a collective space. It doesn't happen so much in an individual space. So then after New York, Rwanda, we began to be invited across the world to many, many places. I don't know why, but people never seem to invite me to places that are just peaceful. I'm not sure why that is. But places where there's been war and oppression that stretches back through the centuries. But just to say as well that the stories that we most frequently hear across the whole world are childhood trauma and gender-based violence in every continent. So we do a lot of work with war military veterans, and some of them talk about the terrible thing war has done to them, but often they want to talk about their childhood. And we work in prisons, and often in prison, we don't say, "Why are you in prison?" We say, "Share your life story." And sometimes it's the first time the prisoner makes a connection between what they did to others and what was done to them. That before they were perpetrators, they had been victims. So healing of memories is about how do you break the cycle that turns victims into victimizers. So traveling the globe made me realize that, yes, there is particularity and uniqueness of every place, of every culture, but there's also profound commonality, that in the end we're one human family. All of us capable of being perpetrators, all of us capable of being victims. And woundedness, none of us escape from. Not necessarily to the same degree, but through our earthly life, all of us will wound other people, and all of us will be wounded ourselves. And so the question is not, I'm not wounded, that's not an option. We all are, but how do we respond to it? And do we become prisoners? Do we live our life shaped by the wounds? I was talking to the Anglican seminarians a few minutes ago there, and I was saying to them, there are kind of three questions. One is, how how do the personal wounds you have, how do they negatively affect you in the family, in the school place, in the workplace? And the second question was, how do your wounds positively affect you in the workplace, in the home, and the other context in which we live our lives? And then the third question, what do we need to do to transform the negative effect of our wounds to find a life-giving response? And one of the things that we've learned is the importance and the power of acknowledgement. Again, it's true of individuals, communities, and nations. And the acknowledgement is not the end of the story, but it's the beginning of a new journey. And also where, like, the moral order is restored. You know, for example, when a man uses violence against a woman, I'm doing this because you're a bad woman, you know, because of the wrong you have done. So the moral order is inverted. Good is called bad and bad is called good. So only finally when somebody says, I believe your story and it was wrong, what happened to you? So then the moral order begins to be restored. But I wanted just to throw in a couple of other concepts that maybe you're conversant with, maybe not. I'm sure you've all heard the term PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and it's used often, particularly in relation to soldiers and you know, the effects of war or cataclysmic events. And it is it's an appropriate term, but often what people are suffering from is not PTSD; it's moral and spiritual injury. So, and some of you may be, there's quite a lot of literature around moral injury, not so much about spiritual injury. But if you take a soldier, or any of us, we grow up, and as children we begin to learn what is right and what is wrong. We begin to internalize the moral code of what is right and what is wrong. And of course, in one of the part of the moral code is we don't kill other human beings. But what we say to soldiers, we'll put a uniform on you, and now you can kill people, and it's not murder. But however, the moral code remains imprinted, which is one of the reasons why old soldiers often cry themselves to sleep. Because regardless of what the commander said, I took another human life, and I remain haunted by it. Society says, okay, well, the band will play, we'll give you lots of medals, but in the darkness, it is another story. And also, most faith traditions have a belief that there's something of the divine in all of us. I'm sure when God heard about this place, she smiled. Said, "Oh, wow, this idea, this place, yes, yes." Because you see, it speaks to the divine. The divine is about our creativity, you know. And so when I attack you, I attack the divine in you as well as the divine in myself. There's that wonderful thing in Hinduism where you namaste. You know, I honor the divine in you, and the divine which is also myself. You know, sometimes when I'm interviewed, people say, "Oh, you know, is this based on narrative therapy? What?" I say, I don't know what kind of. This is what we developed. In other words, and of course, and you probably discovered this already. Sometimes amazingly original ideas are discovered by different people at the same time in different places, and it doesn't mean they've cheated or copied from each other. But wisdom is wisdom is wisdom, and it emerges often in many different places, and no culture has a monopoly on it. Let me stop there. Thank you very much. We can go home now. So open that up to a conversation. But maybe we're a small enough group. Let's hear from everybody. Let's hear everybody's voice.
When you're holding workshops with people who've had different, like, traumatic experiences or soldiers, do you think you're changing how people think about their memories, or you're changing their Like, what is it do you think that is actually helping them? Is it the actual conversation and the connection with the other people in the room? Or do you feel the same, do you feel the same effect when you're having a one-on-one conversation with a person?
Just repeat the last bit again.
Do you have the same effect when you're having like a one-on-one conversation, or do you see big differences?
Yeah. See, what we do is on the first night, what I've used here is a set of photos. I think they used to have this, sexist term, family of man, photographs. And we use it on the first night as an emotional trigger. We want people to begin to open up their wounds. And we give them a set of questions to reflect overnight. And the questions begin with, how has the past of your country affected you? How has the experience of your parents and grandparents affected you? What has been the most wonderful experience of your life? What has been the most painful? What has been your experience of a faith community? Because often that's been a place of both life-giving and profound hurt as well. So and some other questions. So people have reflected on that overnight. And then they come and they share their story. And obviously there's that choice. What do I share? And what don't I share? Sometimes people come to a second workshop. The first workshop was like an exam. These people are worthy to hear my story. Now I will be prepared to speak about it. But in terms of healing, there's a key moment where I'm free to say, I hate, I'm bitter, I'm angry, I want revenge, but it's destroying me. And you see, that's not discovered by me asking you, but don't you know that doesn't do you any good? It's that discovery as well, that, yeah, and yes, I've got good reasons to have those feelings, but it's destroying me. Because at that point, you can begin to let go. We have a simple exercise towards the end where we get people to write down what they want to leave behind at the workshop. And they don't tell anybody, but we burn it. No? Again, it's just kind of between being physical beings and spiritual beings, not religious beings, but spiritual beings. And so we do symbolic things like we were with some First Nations, the whole role of the sweat lodge, all of that stuff. And what do you call it, smidging? Smidging, yes. You call it smidging, yeah. But all of that it's both physical and spiritual. We do physical things, but we're trying to get at the spiritual. But we, as human beings, we can only get at the spiritual via the physical. Some people come back to a second workshop 6 months later. Some will draw the same picture. Some will draw a completely different picture because they've gained a new pair of spectacles to look at their own life. Like I said, I mean, they tell a story as a story of defeat, and everybody else in the room thinks it's a story of victory. And so when people respond in wonder and amazement, I think, oh, maybe I have actually achieved something. And you see, we say to people, one step on the journey of healing. But it can be life-changing if it's something you've never shared before. I don't know if I'm answering the point you're making.
I think so. No, I just have a follow-up.
Just a bit louder, sorry.
I just have a follow-up question. Do you think there's a difference between people who they have like the trauma, but they actually show up to the workshop because they're not, like they're aware that it's bothering them and it's something they want to try to address, versus people who had the same experiences but aren't like in this state to come to a workshop yet, or don't want to, or don't know it's something they need to work on?
I think people come as volunteers, but our best adverts are when you come to the workshop and you go back and you tell your friend, this is what I gained at the workshop. But my dear, you're much more messed up than I am. You should go to, the workshop. So the witness of the word of mouth. But people often come to the workshop having intended to share A, B, and C, but ending up sharing D, E, and F. And it's to do, and sometimes it's interesting, people who ask to be last in the circle. The last one in the circle, they're testing, are these people trustworthy? can they be trusted? And if they're not trustworthy, you don't share, or you share very superficially. But if the people have shown to be trustworthy and vulnerable themselves, that often gives people permission to share their own vulnerability. And there are people who come and they say, "It's taken me 3 years. I've known about this workshop, but the workshop's happening on Saturday. Oh, I've just remembered I'm getting married tomorrow. I won't make it." Because you see, also victimhood becomes a way of life as well. And maybe I don't want to leave it behind, because victimhood has a certain negative power as well. And in the Hebrew tradition, the whole story of how the Jewish people, the Israelites, preferred the flesh pots of Egypt than the Promised Land. So sometimes people have internalized living as victims, not having to take responsibility. So taking responsibility is scary, but also it's very interesting. In South Africa, we struggle to get white people to attend the workshops. Why? Guilt and shame. Guilt and shame, not what they've often done individually, but what's been done in their name on their behalf. It's the same reason in Germany, people kept quiet for a generation at the end of the Second World War. And eventually the grandchildren said, "Grandma, Granddad, where were you? What did you do?" And they thought that a silence for a generation, it would go away, but it doesn't. It just passes on to the next generation.
May I ask how, you said at first you had trouble getting white people to attend the workshops. How did that, how were you able to change that?
We haven't. To any degree, we still struggle. I mean, there are some exceptions to that, but in general, that remains true. And of course, it's the guilt and shame issue, but also South Africa is a very materialistic society, and I think black people know much more that they're wounded. Where white people don't always, we've got the expensive car, we've got this, we've got that. So you live on a materialistic way, and then don't face the wounds. But they won't go away. It'll pass the next generation. And because the harder it is when you're dealing with stuff that happened 4 or 5, generations back. Yep. Yes. Well, let's hear from everybody. It'd be nice to hear all your voices. Be brave.
I guess just a question about when you were younger, what did you want to do? Did you know that you wanted to go on?
Yeah, I had this problem when I was 4. I couldn't decide whether to be a priest in the church or a clown in the circus. And when I became a priest, my brother sent me a message and said, "Now you've succeeded at both." But certainly, so being a priest was fundamentally important. But that I was to become a freedom fighter. And also, as I said, being in the liberation struggle had prepared me for death, not for major physical disability. That is another. And also, I suppose my Westernness made me think, after I was bombed, I thought, okay, I can add to my curriculum vitae, I've been bombed. Now can I get on with my life? And realizing that the consequences were permanent, and the journey of coming to terms, with that. When I was in hospital, I remembered an image I had seen. I don't know, the holy icons of the Orthodox tradition, the holy pictures. And I'd seen a picture of Jesus with one leg shorter than the other. And it picks up something from the book of Isaiah, that the Messiah was disfigured. People turned away their heads. And here was a Messiah with one leg shorter than the other. And for me, coming to terms with permanent major physical disability was very helpful. And also I began to see that disability, brokenness, incompleteness is the human story. Perfection is not the human story. And in a way, I think those of us with traumatic disabilities remind the rest of the human family of what is true of all of us, Except some of us, it's very visible, but it's no less true of the rest of us. Yeah.
It's really, and I guess maybe just a follow-up question.
Sure.
Do you think that if the bombing hadn't happened, you would have started the Institute this way, or do you think you would have?
I mean, I think that's highly
Yeah.
unlikely. I mean, it's a speculative question, but it was a response to the reality of what had happened to me. And when I started the Institute, I thought, I don't know if this is going to last for 6 months, a year, but it was the right thing to do at the time. And little did I realize that even though we're quite small, we have a big footprint, that it would, we have the CSJR is also part of a global network. We work in about 16 different African countries. We work in Myanmar and Thailand and Sri Lanka, as well as all these African, and also we have an office in Luxembourg, in New York. So there's this global dimension. And what is beautiful about our work, we're not creating dependence on ourselves at all. In fact, the more people are healed, the more they're free to live their lives, to go on their way rejoicing, to live whole lives, and to gain the skills that when new trauma happens, they don't have to be prisoners of it forever. So part of the key is this importance that we all need companions on the way. And I'm sure in a way this is part of what happens informally here. You become, even though your interests may be very different, you find companions on the way that give you the encouragement and support. Yeah. Okay, you've been so quiet so far.
I think my tea has been.
And then you're going to come after that. Okay. Thank you.
Could you talk about the limits of processing your experience with stories so as to avoid rumination or spiraling? And the reason I ask is
Say that again, to avoid
rumination or spiraling. And the reason I ask is just like if you're asked to think about the way you walk and walk very slowly, then it's hard to, it feels awkward to walk and then you can't function as well as before.
You need to unpack this question a bit more.
What should I?
What?
I think, tell me if I'm wrong, but do you mean once you put your attention on something, it's hard to almost see it objectively. You almost obsess about it. And so how do you get people to share that story and release it as opposed to share that story and obsess? Is that, yes?
I think that's in a way how the whole model works. So a Healing of Memories workshop is storytelling in the context of journey. So how the workshop is structured, you open up the wounds on the first night, you tell your story. On the second night, we have a party, chill out. And often it's the first time people have laughed or danced since whenever. And then we create a ceremony as part of the closing. Now, if you came to one of our workshops that we, in partnership with a particular church, okay, this is a Christian workshop. If you came to a workshop in which there were Muslim, Jew, Hindu, whatever, you said, this is an interfaith model. If you went to one of our workshops in prison, you said, okay, this is a secular workshop. So, but the whole, so if you like, you're taking your clothes off on the first night, but at the end you're putting on fresh clothes to continue. The wound's still there, but to continue on. So it's in a way it's achieving what you, but sometimes, I mean, in the complexity of human beings, there will be some people who will need further follow-up individually, and sometimes the wounds have come. And I think Estelle has borne witness here where some participants, the pain was quite acute, which is why we say to people who are in therapy, please let your therapist agree that you can come to this workshop as well. But also therapists often send people to the workshop as well because they recognize the collective value, and that often when people go back into therapy, they've taken a big jump forward and being able to look at the things that have happened. So and also the description of the burning. So healing in memories is letting out and letting go. So the model is framed in that kind of way, as opposed to a kind of static storytelling. And also because storytelling by itself doesn't equal healing. Wars are kept going by storytelling. Grandparents tell their grandchildren stories to keep the hatred alive. So that's why I say storytelling in the context of journey. Am I answering what you're raising or not?
Yes, I have a follow-up question.
Yeah, sure. Only I can have a follow-up question only if you agree to talk louder.
Sure. Would you say that the method you just described is the same regardless of doing it with a group or by himself?
It's an interesting question. I think obviously a big part of healing is the internal journey in myself. But our methodology is a collective methodology, and that's part of its gift, is precisely that collective character to it. Because only by the collective process do I feel less alone and know that other people have the same feelings that I have. And as I say, pain is transcendent. Pain connects people as well, even across, in the United States, they said to us, with military veterans, they said, military veterans can only talk to military veterans. Okay, all right, I'll go along with that. So then after some time, they said, well, we wouldn't mind some people in the faith community joining us. This is after a number of workshops. So the faith community joined in, and the military veterans said it was wonderful to discover people in the faith community were just as messed up as they were. Because I think people often think there's a kind of uniqueness. And in one sense there is, in another sense there's not, because it's what people are able to do to each other. And also this issue of trust. Trust is a big, especially where there's been war and conflict, people have learned not to trust to survive. But as human beings, we need to trust. So creating that. So one of the ground rules of our workshops is confidentiality. I'm free to tell anybody what I said at the workshop, but I can't tell what you said, only if you gave me permission. And that's, again, part of safety. And the other thing, of course, is not being judged. Often people have, somebody says, years ago I admitted that I'd had an abortion and I was condemned. So I keep quiet for another 10, 20, 30 years. But then eventually I need to talk about it because the pain was still there. So not being judged is important. Or I tried to take my own life. But if you're in a place, a not safe place, where you got judged and condemned, then you'll go back into the silence, even for decades. Okay, thank you. Then the lot fell on you, Alex.
Yes. Thank you for sharing your experiences and perspective today. My question is about something you mentioned just now, which I'm curious about, which is that you mentioned that survival is very passive, and the transformation from survival to victory is one where they reclaim agency, they and I'm assuming they live an active kind of life. And my question is, what does it look like from the other side? Maybe could you share some stories of people who have come out the other side victorious, as opposed to remaining passively surviving?
I think it can mean a million different things. It might mean you go back to school. and want to improve yourself, it might mean that you join a community organization. It might be that you maybe you're an abused woman, you join an organization that works with abused women. So you're no longer wrapped in your own self, but also have compassion towards others, and you can begin to accompany others. We always say that those who would be the healers of others must be on their own journey of healing, not having to have arrived. If you've arrived, you're probably dead. So, but needing to be on the way. So there's an unlimited number of things that a particular person might do. Sometimes, like we just had on Saturday, this phase 2 workshop, dealing with anger, overcoming hatred, struggling with forgiveness. Well, sometimes people in a workshop discover there's somebody that I need to say, I'm sorry. There's somebody I need to, sometimes the person that I have unfinished business with has died. And so sometimes people say, oh, I need to write a letter. I need to get out stuff that I never had a chance to say. There's no standard of what that would look like. As an institute, we wanted to try and frame our work as the journey from healing to restorative and transformative justice, to be part of changing the context. And that can be very, we work with human rights activists and local communities where they have a chance to deal with their own wounds, even as they champion local causes at a very, very local level. Does that make sense to?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Now who have we not heard from?
Cal.
Yeah. I wanted to ask a question about. You mentioned that you had those 3 questions you asked, right? The one that was, how does this experience, how has it negatively affected me, and then how has it positively affected me, and then your third one, which is the kind of transformation of the first one into the second one. I'm interested, like, what do people, are the responses that you get completely different, or do people have a kind of process that they find gets them from that negative experience to positive, or being able to kind of move beyond the experience?
I think just recently, in a number of contexts, and some of them are online, I've used those 3 where we've had a sort of Zoom meeting over 2.5 hours, and people go on in for half an hour in small groups to answer those questions. I think the commonality would be this issue of acknowledgement, that the whole issue of breaking the silence and being able to speak and know that I will not be judged or dismissed. I've done quite a lot recently with religious orders, both here in Canada, also in South Africa, and often the communities talk about the areas of silence, the no-go areas. So often, again, if the space is safe enough, people begin to be able to share, and if it's a safe space, to have acknowledged that. And sometimes people have already discovered the life-giving, so they're bearing witness. Sometimes people are already victorious, but they've been telling their stories a story of defeat for so long. They need other people to say, you say it's a story of defeat? What? And look what you're doing with your life, So again, as I say, other people can give us different pairs of spectacles. But I think the word acknowledgement, and I think often that word is not used, but that's what people are describing as well. And I think that's universal. Like you can point to so many countries in the world where the issue of heads of state being able to say, I'm sorry. And lots of them can't. They're unable to say, I'm sorry. Now, I'm sorry is never the end. And one of the reasons they don't want to say it is because it might touch their pocket once they've said, I'm sorry. But we see, I could go country after country, continent after continent, where there's issues of acknowledgement at national and international level are important just as much as they are within our intimate relations. But of course also sometimes as people, we can forgive some terrible travesty on a political scale, but I can't forgive my intimate partner who cheated on me. And I think it's in our, the most difficult thing we have is in our intimate relationships. I think precisely because in our intimate relationships, we become very vulnerable, and therefore we are able to be hurt, much more deeply, because of that. But I suppose our whole work across the world, it bears witness to healing is possible. Not easy, not cheap, and it can take decades, but it's possible. And that would be what we'd want to popularize. I think also, this is we're talking here. It's the academy. Lots of cerebral stuff, but maybe not enough heart stuff. Maybe not enough. The cerebral stuff can be a little bit reductionist at a certain, because it doesn't speak to the wholeness of our humanity. And the same with children. We give them all this head knowledge, but we don't teach them how to live with their emotions and how to express them in a healthy way. So we need much, we need leaders in the world who can respond in terms of our whole humanity, because then they can give leadership to their nation. But when it's reduced to the cerebral stuff, it's problematic, because that's often not where the problem is. But it is in the woundedness of a people. I was criticized last night for appearing to have joked about in this province about English and French. And someone was very pissed off with me, because for her that was serious wound, the experience of so the all the and in a sense as well, we may be brothers living in the same context, and for you this is not a significant wound, but for the other person it can be extremely significant. That's why when families have undergone trauma, one member of the family may need long-term therapy and another doesn't at all. They still got hurt, but they haven't collapsed in the same kind of way. Am I answering the things you're raising? Okay, and then I think my sister there. Yeah. I know you found the furthest corner to sit.
I've been thinking a lot, and you just mentioned family, and I had this question of how can someone heal when they're still in an environment where especially family members who have gone through trauma, but the child still live with them, and is it really possible to heal in an environment where still that triggers these feelings of I don't know, like.
I don't know if I've heard you fully, but maybe sometimes, if let's say a woman is in an abusive relationship, and still in that abusive relationship, the key issue is not healing. The key issue is being safe. The key issue is getting out of that. But then the time will come when healing will be possible. But also part of the difficulty of healing is when the same wounds keep on happening as well. Especially those of us who are church people and men have often sent women back into abusive relationships, and they've died, where they should have been supported to make life-giving choices, for themselves. So patriarchy carries very heavy responsibility in relation to trauma. Myself, I believe that the relationship between men and women and the role of patriarchy is perhaps the oldest wound in the human family. And tackling it, both for women and for men, is about the liberation of women and men and all the genders in between, but because it's about the fullness of our own humanity. So it's not accidental that across the world, the most frequent story, apart from childhood trauma, is gender-based violence. So we need, there are important, in South Africa, gender-based violence is of epidemic proportions. And people say it's got nothing to do with our history. Dream on, it's got everything to do, with our history as well. And also the way the boy child is brought up. We're not going to stop gender-based violence if the boy child is not brought up in a different way, where he can express emotions in a healthy way. So it's not about getting excellent grades. It's I think it's in Denmark. They have a whole program with kids teaching them empathy, which is the sort of thing we need. It's like we were told. I went to do some work in Rwanda, and they said, "Oh, in Rwanda, men don't cry." Oh, okay, all right, fine, thank you. So we had a workshop, and all the men cried. Because people cry. There may not be. I want to have a poster printed. Perhaps you can help fund it. That says "Real men cry." Yeah, because we cry as human beings, but there are cultures that, and often maybe for good reasons of survival, there was no permission. There was a need to be tough, and not. But if we don't cry outside, we cry inside. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And what about the Estelles and the Lucys? We haven't heard from.
Maybe.
Anita wanted to talk.
Okay, yes.
No. I've had a few questions as you spoke, so I've chosen one. Which is just, I think it's come up a few times wondering, both in your workshops and even just in your interactions with people in general, do you have guidelines or an ingredient list for how do you make a person feel safe to share?
Yeah, no, thank you. In our workshops, we have agreed ground rules. The first, second, third, fourth, and fifth ground rule is confidentiality. And the most important, and we have ground rules that, and when people are sharing, no one writes. But also, it's how you as a facilitator conduct yourself as well. Is each person treated with the same reverence and respect? So, oh, she's a professor, we must treat her extra specially. And okay, you're just a student. I mean, don't worry, you haven't got much to say. I mean, so it may not be with words, but how people are treated. We had a time when we had a lot of international visitors, and some of our facilitators said to the international visitors, "Oh, you come from a rich country. I know you don't have much to say, so we'll give you 10 minutes." We sent all our facilitators back to retrain them, to learn that people are people, and what you see is not what you see is not what you get. Actually, what lies behind the eyes.
Follow up.
Yep. Am I answering the first part?
Yes, but you said that in the workshop, usually the last person to speak is the one that needs to be sure that they can trust, which also means that sometimes it's more than just knowing that you're not going to repeat it, it's confidential, but like I don't even want to say it out loud. And is there any way, like something they don't even want to say out loud? And is there any way to bring that up, or do you just let it stay until they're ready?
We're always inviting people to go deeper, but in a reverent and respectable way. It's about space and permission, not force. So if I say, "Yeah, but how did you feel when your mother passed away?" I don't want to go there. We won't force it, but it will tell us and you that that's actually a big thing. And maybe the next workshop you'll be ready to share. Sometimes what does happen is people will come to the facilitator during the lunch break and say, "There's something else I need to tell you, that I'm not ready for everybody to hear," especially if there's guilt and shame, maybe shame especially. And of course, as human beings, there are terrible things in which we sometimes we blame ourselves for being the victim. Like a woman has been raped, it's my fault. No, it's not your fault. I mean, I had a little bit of that when I was bombed. I thought, maybe I deserve to be bombed, all the bad things. But those are fake, false voices. One needs to say, no, no, that's not true. And no one deserves to be treated, like that.
Thank you.
How about the Lucys and the Estelles?
Well, maybe I will add that something which is very helpful in the workshop is the drawing. Mm-hmm. We use drawings to talk about our story. So it's very helpful because you've got like a media, you know. So for people to have this drawing is less difficult than just telling your story, because we are looking at the drawing, not, well, also at the person, but the drawing is in the center, you know. So for the facilitator, it's also helpful to ask questions about the drawing, you know. And sometimes there are secrets in the drawing, and so it helps the people to talk about them. Yeah.
So often the picture will reveal things that are not in the story. Yeah. They say, what about that? Well, why is your father that high and your mother is that high? Sometimes people put things in the picture they don't realize themselves how much they're revealing as well. Yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't see you hiding behind that.
Yeah, so I got here late, and I also chose a terrible day to wear this blasphemous t-shirt. Anyways, musicians will understand. That's why I'm hiding. Should I wear something else? Because there's cameras, and I know that with cameras, you're not supposed to wear like labels and stuff.
We don't see it.
Yeah. Okay, great. Okay.
We don't see it.
Cool. Hi. This is very interesting. I didn't know this was happening. But in terms of the themes that have been explored around trauma and gender, I do think that a lot of women have probably experienced a lot of situations that aren't spoken of for whatever reason, you know, and that kind of victim mentality, I do think women will also be accused of a lot of the time, where it's like, grow up, you know. But yeah, like I that's probably the only thing I can comment on in terms of what I've heard so far.
And of course, whether it's sexism or racism, the card can also be played in a false way. When relationships go sour between couples, one can play the card, well, I was raped. Now, of course, a huge amount of time was true, but there can also be occasions where it was not true, and it was exploited, which happens because of that situation, that you can exploit it in that way. Or he can say, it's because I'm black, you're treating me this way. No, damn, it's because you didn't do your work. But in a racist society, one can always play that card as well, because the structure is like that, but it can also be exploited. My sister?
Just maybe one thing, at my first workshop, I was really afraid. I don't want to go, but I came and I was searching, what will I say, I found it, okay, I will talk about one specific thing. And with the drawing and sharing, completely other things comes out. I was so amazed, yeah. And what is interesting is I saw this other thing that I've forgotten, but I saw also beautiful things in my life. It's not only to point a painful thing, it's to see the painful thing and the rest of my life. So it's lightning, no? Comment on dit? Life-giving. So it was really, really a beautiful surprise for me.
No, I have nothing. Surrender.
I surrender. Set it on. Set it on.
Okay.
I think that two things about the workshop. One is that once you're asked, to make the drawing of your life, you don't know what you're gonna be drawing. You really don't know. You might have thought about it, like Lucy said, but when you're in front of it, I draw these little, tiny little figures, and they tell a story. They tell my story. But while doing it, I see the reaction of other people around the room. I think that's one key aspect of having people and being able to trust. This was a challenge for me, and I experienced it, and it was very positive, because after that, and I think that's one very important aspect about these workshops, is that you're not alone, and the story you hear are sometimes so incredibly painful, but sometimes it's a mirror. You see part of your own story in the other person telling his story or her story. So that's one thing. And it's the also realization of the responsibility of our common humanity. We have a responsibility to, I knew it, I guess, I knew it up here. But after that, after the workshop and meeting you guys, I feel that I'm not walking alone anymore, and I'm responsible for the steps I make, and and being conscious as well of the wound that I might be inflicting on others, and that I might have to say sorry. So I'm growing up.
At last, thanks to God.
Yeah.
Never too late to grow up.
Okay, thank you.
So when I was 50, I said at my 50th birthday party, I tried to be an adult for years. It failed. I'm just going to continue to be a child.
Great.
Yes. Yeah. But also the mirror, just that image. I think when we ask people to draw their life story, I think of it as the creation of a mirror. That's who I am. But as Carol is also saying, that as you tell your story, your story is a mirror to my own story. We see even though our lives may have been very different, we see something of it and the choices that they have made as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody spoken?
Yes.
Thank you.
Not the cameraman, not Elena.
It's your big chance to speak.
I did have a question actually. Like you were talking about saying your story sometimes, but sometimes it's not a heartfelt story, and I'm just wondering how the audience that it's directed towards, what your experience is with that. Like it's almost a token story, and how do you deal with that? Because anybody can say I'm sorry, but do they really mean it?
Well, I mean, again, that's true of individuals, communities, and nations. It's what is the content of being sorry, which is why when people, for example, have been in abusive relationships, and the abuser says, "I'm sorry," the best response would be, "Thank you very much for the sorry, but I'll never stay with you again." As opposed to, "You're sorry, everything is fine." Especially where there's repeated abuse. Because for me, that's also about healthy self-love as well. Loving oneself enough to not put oneself in harm's way. But it said the proof of the pudding is in the eating. If you're sorry, what's the content of that? We were doing some work with some prisoners in a South African prison, and we came back after the workshop, a kind of reunion, and some of the prisoners said, we wrote to the people who we had hurt and asked for forgiveness, and there was silence. So I said, well, I'm sure it's after you get out of prison and they'll see what you do with your life, that then they'll see the content of sorry, what it is. Thank you.
So actions. What are your actions after?
Yes, exactly. What are your actions? How do you live your life? Is it you're sorry? Well, let's see how you're going to live your life, and then you may get the response. Okay, yeah, we forgive you. But especially where people have been hurt profoundly, they can experience that as, cheap get out of jail freely, rather than dealing with the consequence. At the same time, the sorry is a part of it. But we also know in our intimate relations that some of us are able to say sorry. Some of us can't say it, but we act sorry. In a good sense. I don't mean play acting, serious way. And so we need to have our eyes open to see that there are various ways of expressing sorry. And so someone can be living a life of showing that they're sorry. Like in a sense to say, if I've been benefited from a fundamentally unjust society and how I live the rest of my life, to not cringe, but I'll show that I'm sorry by the way things I will support and the things I will work for, that will show the content. And as I say, that was, I think, one of the important conversations that we saw emerging from Black Lives Matter. Those of us who are white beginning to face up to white privilege and the responsibility that goes out, and the actions and how I spend my money, and all of those things are all part of that. Yeah. Thank you for being here.
Thank
Beautiful.
you.
Can I join this group? Can I come every week? until.
It's a house, you can stay.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Merci.